And now, here's the host of the God, Family, and Country radio show, Lance Hoppus.
And good evening this Sunday evening. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening again to us, because I want to tell you, tonight is going to be a power-packed night for you. Have a guest coming on that is absolutely phenomenal. His credentials are longer than both of my arms extended, and I don't have real short arms. So I want you to hold on and think about that. First of all, I'm going to ask you, are y'all praying? And are you trying to change your wicked, evil ways? Are you telling your children and your grandchildren about God and about Jesus Christ and about the phenomenal presence of God in this nation and the history of this nation? God's presence has been continuously in this nation. We have to pray at this time for a continuous softening in our government, that everybody decides to finally get with God and turn around and support this president, President Donald J. Trump. I've been behind that man for a long time, and I can find no fault in this man. And I prayed about him for a long, hard time when election time came. Nonetheless, if you don't like him, it really doesn't matter. You know, the way we were raised that are listening to this program, because we're all about the same age, I would imagine, he is the President of the United States. You do support the President of the United States because that's your team. That's your team. So we have a huge problem on our hands with our youth being radicalized, being taught with a liberal education. We have a huge problem on our hands with things that are going on inside of our government, trying to block our government from moving forward. And I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to be able to find, if you'll only pick up a book and read, Raising a Jihadi Generation, written by our guest, John Guandola. I have sitting with me right here is Roy White, retired Lieutenant Colonel Roy White. Roy, why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about John, and then let's get rolling on this program.
Well, thanks, Lance. Thanks for having us again and hosting this show, as well as providing the funds to provide this information to the audience.
Those funds are provided by God.
Well, and I know that, and I will and just praise His name for the courage that He's given you and gives us all to be able to speak the truth. And someone who exemplifies that courage, in my opinion, is our guest today. John Guandola is a former Marine, 1989 graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, and just like the oath I took to protect and defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
And I took.
And he took that oath, and in 1996, having resigned his commission from the Marine Corps, transitioned to become one of America's finest at the FBI as an FBI special agent. And John, wherever he has gone, has excelled. And after 9/11, after serving before 9/11 in many prestigious positions and rising up through the ranks, he was recognized for his work and designated within the FBI's Washington field office expertise in the Muslim Brotherhood, the Islamic doctrine, the global Islamic movement. Those were topics that at the time were foreign to most of us. And foreign somewhat to John. And over the last, sad to say, 16 and a half years, John has become a leading authority on those areas. And he served within the FBI as a subject matter expert at the headquarters, briefing senior administration officials, general officers at the Pentagon, state officials, federal legislators, officers, and began to really build a data bank of information that has been, I think, second to none on his website. And John is the executive director and founder of an organization called UnderstandingTheThreat.com. And at that website, again, straight as it sounds, UnderstandingTheThreat.com is, I think, one of the premier sites that anybody, if you're interested in getting the facts, not myths about Islam and what's going on in the world today, John breaks it down in ways that even as an ex-fighter pilot, and John as a Marine will understand this, makes it even simple for a fighter pilot to understand. So I am honored to have John here on the show today. John, welcome aboard, and thanks for coming on today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And again, thank you to both of you for what you're doing by simply speaking the truth. It's a simple thing, but it's a powerful thing, and it needs to be done, and it's not happening enough. So I appreciate what you all are doing, so I'm glad to be a part of this.
Exactly, and we started the group here in San Antonio, G416 Patriots, based upon the Galatians verse of 4:16, where Paul goes back and begins to talk to the people in Galatia that he had spoken with and said, I'm now telling you the truth, and now I'm your enemy, and you have found yourself on the wrong end of that stick in many, many occasions since you got into this fight. Initially, you were recognized by the FBI and many federal agencies with awards and recognitions. What's the consequences of telling the truth? What's happened? Don't go in, I want to get into some of the current events, but I think it's important for people to understand what's happened to you from telling the truth and why we need to stay strong in this fight, John.
Well, I will just say that the easiest analogy, or not analogy, the easiest piece of my story to share that exemplifies what you're asking is after I did the first training program in the government about the Muslim Brotherhood, their network, about Sharia, never done. It was a 2-week program, which is almost unheard of in the government. For this kind of type of training, and we had people there from every major federal agency, local, state law enforcement, you name it, they were in the room, including Department of Justice analysts from the counterterrorism and the finance division. We had an assistant U.S. attorney sit through a 2-week program, about 50 people, and every one of them said everyone in the government and in law enforcement needs to know this information. That was August 2006. When I came back from that program, I was kind of told in a very tongue-in-cheek way, good job, now sit down, get back to work. You're behind on this paperwork, you're behind on this, so we're going to ding you on this and ding you on that. And what I came to find out was it's much better in the government to go along and get along than it is to actually do what you swear an oath to do. And it changed something in me with regard to how I viewed the leadership. Now, I already had realized there was an issue with the leadership in the FBI and in the government in general. But there were a lot of good men and women, and there still are in the FBI. Unfortunately, most of them are not in the leadership.
Right.
I mean, the executive leadership is horrible right now, not just the outgoing director.
Right.
And they've spent years now avoiding dealing with this issue, and it's costing America dearly. So, yes, there are consequences for telling the truth, but we are, we are speaking to a predominantly Christian audience, so I would say that's okay, because that's the norm of being a Christian, is suffering. To suffer is to be a Christian. To be a Christian and think you're not going to suffer means you're living in la-la land. And Jesus said, they persecuted me, they will persecute you.
Exactly.
So,
and we had
not a possibility, it's a reality.
That's right. We had your good friend and mine too, Phil Haney, on, who's another example of someone showed, and I was introduced to Phil the first time by attending one of your courses, and I just was, his courage of doing that. But I want to get into, your website at understandingthethreat.com. Your most recent post talks about the Islam conquest of America, one town at a time. I think many cities, and San Antonio is the 7th largest city or 8th largest city in the country. There are estimates as many as 30,000 Muslims. There are 14 mosques here in San Antonio. And you talk about the conquest of America one town at a time, and you highlight 3 particular cities. Give our readers, and again, they can go to this website at understandingthethreat.com, and you'll find many, many other resources, all the documents that John talks about in his book, Raising a Jihadi Generation, and that can be found on Amazon and lots of other sites. But talk a little bit about that blog and give people just a taste of what's happening in some of these cities.
Well, I think to explain it, if I could give maybe a 1-minute build up to it, or 90-second build up, is that you have to understand Islam. And when you understand Islam, and specifically Sharia, then you understand everything that's going on. You understand the words that are being spoken. You understand the actions that are being taken by these guys. Look, just yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, it might have been see, today is Wednesday, so it might have been Monday afternoon, British time. One of the leaders from the Muslim community in front of a bunch of journalists said, here's who we are. I'm talking to Muslims right now. You need to rise up in this struggle. You need to do the dawah, the call to Islam. You need to get out there. We need to continue this until the flag of Islam flies over 10 Downing Street. And he turned and walked away. And one of the British reporters literally says, you can hear it, you are joking, aren't you? Just
Wow.
demonstrating the catastrophic disconnect from reality.
Wow.
In Islam, Sharia drives everything. I have a book coming out that literally I've been fighting this week to try to get the final edits done, called It's All About Sharia. And if you understand Sharia, you understand everything you're witnessing. Because Sharia is Islam. Sharia is Allah's law. And to be a Muslim is to submit to Allah, which means to submit to his law, which is the Sharia. And 100% of Sharia mandates jihad until the entire world's under Islamic rule, under Sharia, under one man, a caliph, a one-world state. As a matter of fact, Islam specifically says the purpose of Islam is to eliminate all places on the earth where there isn't Sharia until it is all Sharia. That's the job, and to do it through a number of means, not just violence,
Right.
but through a whole host of means. And one of the ways is the example of the hijrah. And so it doesn't just mean going from Muslim countries to non-Muslim countries, like immigrating to the United States. That is a part of it. That's a part of jihad. The muhajirun, those people that immigrate,
Right.
that's part of jihad. That's who those people are. These quote-unquote refugees coming to the United States are not merely refugees.
Hey.
This is a form of the jihad. So, understanding that, it's no different than coming from the non-Muslim area into America, so that already is part of the jihad,
Right.
and then congregating in certain areas, specific areas. Now, some of this the U.S. government helped with because we dumped thousands of refugees from certain very anti-American, very Sharia-adherent countries like Somalia and Syria and other places in specific locations around the country. So we actually helped them
Right.
in building their Islamic community because we intentionally put them all in one spot.
Hey, John?
Well, Sharia requires them to then first ask for accommodations, and then when their numbers get big enough, to demand accommodations, and then when those accommodations are not met, violently begin using all means in the system, the political system, violence, whatever it takes, because, and you have to, I really want your audience to understand, the people you're watching, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the men and women that are blowing themselves up, like in Manchester,
Right.
that are driving over people, stabbing people, shooting people, hitting them with hammers, whether it's Fort Hood, Texas, whether it's Boston, whether it's Chattanooga, Tennessee, Little Rock, Arkansas, Seattle, Las Vegas, Arlington, Virginia, wherever. They are doing what is lawful under Sharia.
Hey,
Because
John.
they're very sincere. Yes, sir.
John, to interrupt you here, I want to rewind this just a little bit because what you're touching on is so vitally important, but I know that most of the listeners aren't really grasping the full intent of what you're saying. So I'm going to crack this egg a little bit, okay? Because
Okay.
I've been on your website and some other websites really looking at this, and I saw a phenomenal. This video was a video of a mosque that was filled with Muslims, and the man up in front of the Muslims was talking. He was the imam. He was talking to them, and I suddenly got it. It was so clear because it's all language, and it's like you said. You have to understand the language. Their language is pretty much in a reverse of ours. Their understanding of the words or their meaning of their words. For instance, he asked the question out there, are we all here? Are we all Muslim? And they all said yes. See a sign of hands, and they all raised their hands. Are we violent? If we're violent, raise your hands. No hands were raised. But if we're Muslim, don't we believe in the tenets of Islam and Muhammad? And don't we believe in Sharia? See a sign of hands. Every hand went up. And there were several hundred of them in there. Okay? But if we believe in Sharia, does that make us violent? Are we violent because we believe in Sharia and practice Sharia? See a sign of hands? No. Are we terrorists because we believe in Sharia? No. Do we believe in peace? See a sign of hands? Yes. But we all know and understand there can only be peace when all the infidels are no longer here. And everyone has converted to Islam. See a sign of hands, and the hands all went up. It's like so where I'm going to with this, John, which you're explaining, but I just want the listener to be able to get the visual understanding of what we're facing, because it's like if you're Catholic listening to this show, if you're Jewish, if you're Baptist, Lutheran, whatever your faith is, we all have the tenets that we follow of Christianity, the teachings of Jesus, right? And their path is totally reversed from ours. Correct, John? That's what you're saying, right?
Well, right, and that's exactly right, because what Islam teaches is that the entire world must be subjugated to the Sharia. And why? Because it's Allah's law. There's no other choice. And so it's Sharia. In Sharia, homosexuals must be killed. Non-Muslims must either convert to Islam, submit to Islamic law, and pay the non-Muslim poll tax, or be killed. And that's just for Jews and Christians. For all the rest of the world, they have to convert or be killed. So we're talking about a very specific legal system that they're abiding by, and our leadership keeps saying, no, they don't mean that. No, they don't mean that. In Manila, last weekend, we had a Muslim, just 4 days ago, killing people in a hotel, lighting fires, screaming Allahu Akbar, and the Manila police and the leadership called it a, quote, robbery gone wrong. And it took ISIS twice. They had to say, no, that's our guy. And they were like, no, it's a robbery gone wrong. And ISIS was like, no, he's a jihadi waging jihad.
Okay, John.
You morons.
Yeah.
It's like you got to beat them over the head. The bad guys are telling us exactly what they want, who they are, and what they're doing. I got to imagine somewhere when these guys get together, they just all look at themselves like, what do we need to do? We're telling them. And by the way, if you understand Sharia, they have to tell you. They're required to tell you.
Okay, John.
They're so required to tell you that in the middle of a fight, if you were to ask, why are you fighting us? They are required under Sharia to stop fighting you, give you safe conduct to their lines, sit you down, and explain it to you, which no doubt they've been doing. They're literally in front of our TV cameras saying, no, this is what we're doing.
Right.
We're going to fly the black flag of jihad over the White House.
Right.
We're speaking to John Guandola. We're speaking to John Guandola, author of Raising a Jihadi Generation. He's former FBI agent, former Marine, and is an expert on Muslim Brotherhood, Islamic ideology. He's here today, and he's also the executive director for Understanding the Threat, a 501c3 that trains and specializes in getting local authorities, sheriffs, law enforcement officials, judicial officials educated on the threat that we're talking about here today. And John's our guest. And Lance, you had a question for John.
Yes, I do, because you mentioned our leadership keeps denying it, John. And this just makes my brain boil. And I personally, this is my own personal thought, so I'm asking you this question. I don't believe that our leadership is denying the fact of Sharia or denying the fact of the violence that we're approaching. So why is the leadership making these denials? I think it's because we have already been infested with Islam inside of our government.
Well, first of all, yes. And it goes back to Roy's question about the article I wrote about how do they take over towns, and it's slowly. And so over time, this incremental, slow, step-by-step movement towards Sharia is a reality. This is what they do. And so long as we don't understand that's what they're doing, and so long as we continue to pretend it's something else, then we're missing it. But they're coming at us from a military perspective, many lines of operation, financially, education, through the religion, through the media, through the elected officials, through the law enforcement, propaganda, information operations, political warfare, military, the criminal aspect, all of it. And we're missing it all because we don't understand Sharia. And so yes, they've infested our leadership, and that's how they intend to win the war, by controlling the message of what their true intention is.
And part of that message, John, is the Obama administration. We've only got 2 minutes left here in this segment, but just quickly, the term countering violent extremism is an example of how they've changed the lexicon from speaking honestly to now substituting new words. Give our listeners just in a brief 1 minute plug about the example of what the Obama administration has done with this term and how it dilutes the solving the problem.
Well, so we're all, former active duty guys. So let's talk about this. If we're on a firing range and I say, go ahead and shoot the target, and there's no target out there, you can't hit the target. So long as we are chasing violent extremists, we are not chasing jihadis.
Right.
And so long as we're not targeting jihadis, we will not destroy the jihadi movement. It's not possible.
Right.
And that is the entire intent of their war. They created that language. That language for countering violent extremism came from the British Muslim Brotherhood, the Muslim Brotherhood in the UK. The FBI dutifully went over there in the mid-2000s, 2006 time frame, gobbled that up, brought it back here, and puked it back out. And we have been hugging that thing for over 10 years, and it is a hostile information operation. It's actually, more accurately from a military standpoint, it's a double agent operation, because they're not only controlling what we know, we're only relying on the Muslim Brotherhood to tell us about how to fight the war, which is why we lost the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, why our foreign policy is a train wreck, and why our domestic counterterrorism strategy is incoherent.
John, we're speaking with John Guandola, former FBI agent, Marine, also the executive director for Understanding the Threat. We're going to come back with him at the bottom of the hour. And John, thank you so much. We're going a lot to unpack and discuss in this next portion. So, Lance, thanks so much again for having us on today. It's great.
Thank you, guys. This is what I've been wanting to hear. I do not like political correctness. John, we're going to be back in just 2 minutes. Listeners, don't go away, because you ain't heard nothing yet. And we're back. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening. God bless America. God bless John Guandola. God bless my buddy sitting right here next to me, Roy White, and our producer sitting in this room. You know, when you say God bless to somebody, that's not a statement. That's not a saying. It's really a prayer. And I hope we all hold that in our hearts. Our nation is the greatest nation that's ever been on the face of this earth, because it's what? It's God's creation. Just as Israel was God's nation and is God's nation, so is the United States. It had to be, because there had to be another nation in the western part of the world to take the word of Jesus Christ forward. You can look at anything you want to look at. You can deny it all you want to, but if you're a student of history and student of faith and Christianity, you're going to come to understand that that's the way it is. No nation could ever grow in 240 years financially, politically, militarily, the way this nation has grown, the greatest in the world, and there's many jealous of us. So thank you, dear Heavenly Father. And John Guandola, you're back. Let's go, man. What are we talking about?
Well, we're back to speaking with John Guandola. For those who are just tuning in, John Guandola is former FBI agent, expert on Muslim Brotherhood, Islamic terrorism, has trained hundreds, probably in thousands now, of law enforcement officials at every level, from local, state, federal, and probably international also. John is here today talking about his organization, UnderstandingTheThreat.com, which is a great resource. You need to bookmark it. You can also come back and listen to this podcast. If you like what you heard, come back and listen to us at GodFamilyCountryShow.com podcast. Go there or go to AM930theanswer.com. Go there and visit and go to podcast and then pull up God Family Country. And this week we're going to do something a little bit different. This is the week, obviously, our Sunday, normally the dates are on there, but we're going to start putting the names on there. So John Guandola name will be on that podcast. You'll be able to see that, pull that up and share it and send it out to folks on your Facebook page and wherever to kind of help tell the truth. And John, before we get into talking about the Trump administration, very quickly, for those folks who may have contacts with law enforcement officials, to get this information out at the local level, tell folks a little bit about what your organization does and some of the successes you've had in sharing that with local law enforcement officials around the country, as well as some of the pushback, because you're usually you're met with mixed results when you go places. But let's talk about that very briefly. I want to get that out to the audience.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. The the good news is the results as far as what law enforcement experiences is universal, and that is this. Number one, none of the people that we teach in our 3-day program, whether it's state, federal, local agencies, including the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, have ever heard what we're putting out. And 100% of them say that it's critical to protecting the community, which is why the president of the National Sheriff's Association just recently wrote a letter specifically saying that. We're the only ones giving law enforcement specific tools to proactively find terrorists, jihadis in their community. We're the only ones giving them investigative tools to go after them, and we're the only ones working with attorney generals, state and local law enforcement officials to create innovative strategies to dismantle these networks and create a counterinsurgency model to take our country back. We're the only ones doing it, which is why anti-American socialist Marxist organizations like the ACLU, the Anti-Defamation League, the Southern Poverty Law Center, Hamas Doing Business as CARE, tries to come in and disparage our work. However, lately, local elected officials and law enforcement officials have been ignoring this,
right,
because of our success.
Well, I think that's just, and here in Texas, we need to have more, and oftentimes the big cities are oftentimes too democratic, too left-leaning already. It's the surrounding community. So those people who are listening to our broadcast today in the communities surrounding, don't think your community doesn't need to hear this information. I think it's some of the best targeted information that you can have. I know you've spoken out in San Angelo, Texas, and talked to some of the law enforcement officials out there. I know they talked about it tremendously. But let's jump into the Trump administration. There was a lot of hope going in that there would be some efforts, and we were talking in the break. And the question that a lot of people have is, why hasn't the Trump administration been able to stop the hijra, the immigration issue that's obviously fueling this jihadi growth here in the United States and around the world, but certainly here? We were talking about that. Give us your assessment of what's missing in the action plan that the Trump administration is trying to at least stop this immigration. What's your thoughts about that?
I think what's missing is the same thing that's been missing for 16 years is the people that are making the key decisions do not understand the threat, and they therefore don't have, because you can't have, a strategy to defeat it. So we have already launched missile strikes. We've already engaged the military very aggressively without still, since 9/11, we still have not defined the enemy. And so what's the strategy?
Right.
Still no strategy. Still no identification of a threat. We cannot win this war that way, but this is exactly what the enemy wants. They want us to fire shotgun blasts downrange that have some effect, that kill bad guys. So it looks like we're doing something, gives us hope that we're winning. Meanwhile, they continue to control the national security decision-making process related to this issue. And so long as that's the case, if the president, I don't understand why the president doesn't say today or as we recommended in our 14-point plan that we provided to him and to his staff, why he does not say, I'm freezing all immigration to the United States for the next year until next 3 years until we get a handle on the threat in our country, because it's clearly, based on what we're seeing in Europe, the potential for complete collapse is there. And he has the authority to do it. He doesn't need Congress. He doesn't need the Supreme Court. He doesn't need a federal court. He doesn't need a state court to do it. So that's number one. Number two is designating the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization and shut them down, arrest their leaders, try them for the most serious crimes, which is certainly conspiracy to overthrow the government, those who are in government positions, that's treason and sedition, and give them the maximum punishment, which in some cases is execution.
Right.
And do that. And that's what needs to happen. And collaborators in the government, like the former Attorney General Holder, like Janet Napolitano, need to have handcuffs on them. People that are leaking information that's classified need to have handcuffs on them. And these are the aggressive moves that need to take place. He needs to stop trying to create some kind of consensus with the weak Republican leadership like Paul Ryan and the others, who clearly are not going to do what needs to be done.
Well, John, I think what you're saying is to many of our listeners who listen to our podcast, listen to our broadcast, they scratch their heads and wonder why haven't it always seemed like when the Democrats were there, they could move forward their agenda, and the courts and everyone else, they ignored them. And yet we seem to be the only one wanting to play by the rules, but these are oftentimes rules that are made up not by the Constitution, as Lance says, and many others. And it says, it's full power to the administration to be able to execute those. And yet they seem to be just hamstrung by their own, I'm not sure what, but it is frustrating. I know, and you see that all the time.
I want to share something with our listeners here, Roy and John. There's another book out there that people need to get, and it was written by Trevor Loudon.
Right.
The Enemies Within, and Obama's Enemies Within. Folks, you're given some heavy reads here, okay? Understanding the Jihadi, Raising a Jihadi Generation by John Guandola. And you have to read The Enemies Within by Trevor Loudon. And better yet, even get the DVD, because our government has been infiltrated from the left. And the left is Marxist socialism. And it's being embedded with the Muslim Brotherhood. And CAIR is another wing of the Muslim Brotherhood. The reason I'm telling you this is when you read The Enemies Within and see the DVD, you're going to come to understand how vital it is that you really, really vet who it is that you're going to vote for on these 2018 elections. Or we will not hold the House, we will not hold the Senate. And I want to tell you, and John's here to dispute what I'm going to say, and so is Roy, but if we don't get it right, we've lost this thing. It's just that simple. We have lost. If we don't get it right and get it cleaned out, we have lost it.
Lance, I want to give our listeners again, we're talking to John Guandola, former FBI agent, executive director for UnderstandingTheThreat.com. They can visit John's site. They can sign up for his newsletters, his blogs. He has video information that's out there. They can also reach us here locally at G416patriots@gmail.com. We can add them to our newsletter. We're sending out information. We talked about the Muslim. John mentioned we have a petition here locally to send to President Trump endorsing the concept of declaring the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. It's on change.org. But so by getting that newsletter, you'll find out about who we're going to be talking about each week. So write to us. John, one of the things that I've found most enlightening in my time over the last, it's been almost 2.5 years since we first met, and had the honor to meet you and now call you a dear friend, that is the role that Christianity has played in your life, the lives of our listeners. Obviously, many of our listeners are Christians, but as Christians, we oftentimes scratch our heads and say, well, this is a political issue, it's a military issue. Talk about the spiritual aspect of this and how the Islamists are attacking from a spiritual standpoint the very roots of Christianity and Judaism here in America.
Right.
Well, that's a huge question. Obviously, we could spend several days discussing that.
That's right.
But I will try to be as concise as I can. In my own walk in the last 11 or 12 years, I came out of a very dark place personally, and came to a place. Not that I didn't understand that there was a God and that He was my God, and that all the things that the faith of Christians teach, I believed it. I just had a hard time living it. And I had a lot of struggles in my life that had started at a pretty young age. And so at the time that I was dealing with those things, if I could use the analogy of hitting a brick wall at 100 miles an hour, it was at the same time that my knowledge of this threat was kind of coming to a head, and my starting to walk this out. But what I've found, the truths that I've found are these. Number one, everything we're seeing in the world is merely a reflection of what's going on in the spiritual realm. There's a battle going on, the battle for good and evil, the battle for right and wrong. But for me personally, and I encourage you all and your listeners, is that if you get involved in this, it significantly increases your spiritual warfare.
Amen.
That you have to deal with. However, there's nothing more powerful personally and more joyful than to simply speak truth boldly in love, and watch what happens. And yes, people will attack you. People are going to say nasty things about you. But the beautiful thing is the truth penetrates the human heart. And so things happen. I've had experiences. I've prayed over 3 very well-known Muslim Brotherhood leaders in the United States, personally, one-on-one. And I'm still following up with them to see what's happening with that.
Right.
Those are things that when the first time it happened, it blew my mind. But it was a very clear instruction to me to do it, and I did it. I was not happy about it at the time, but I did it. So I'm sad to say I didn't do it with the kind of heart I probably should have, but it was still an open heart. And over time, the anger and hatred that I had from dealing with these people both in combat and then, scraping parts of human beings off the walls of the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi, and then doing the same thing at the Pentagon, it created a lot of hatred and anger in me. And I needed to get that out of me, and God did that. And quite frankly, I was very stubborn in letting it go, but He took me through the ringer. And that's how we need to approach this. So I don't have hate in my heart today. I do what I do because I think Muslims are trapped in a system that's evil, that enslaves them. And if we truly love other people,
right,
then as Christians, it seems to me there's a majority of the Christian world that supports them being in that evil system. And that's not being a disciple of Jesus. That's being a coward. That's denying the power that God could do in their lives to free them from that. So to say, no, we need to defend them, we need them to do whatever they want, and that means you want them to enslave and kill and torture Christians, because that's what they're doing, because that's what Islam commands. So that's my take on that. As it relates to our law and government and how civil government responds, well, the foundation of our government, according to our founders in the Declaration, which is the ideal, not the Constitution. The Declaration is the ideal of who we are. The Declaration says our founding bedrock is the law of nature and nature's God. And legally defined in the law book that second only to the Bible, the founders used as the resource to form this government was Blackstone's commentaries. And it's the law book that was used in all of our law schools for the first 150 years of the Republic. And it defines the law of nature as the will of God as it can be plainly experienced. So, for instance, animals defend themselves and defend their cubs So as a matter of natural law, we have the inherent right to defend ourselves and our families, and therefore we have the natural right to possess the tools to do so. So our right to keep and bear arms does not come from the Second Amendment. As the federal judge said in the Heller case, it's a right that long predates the establishment of the Republic. So that's simply what it is. And the law of nature's God, as it's defined in Blackstone's commentary, is Holy Scripture. And so when the will, as God's will, as it's experienced in nature, does not give us a clear understanding of how we should act, then Holy Scripture does. And so that's the formation of our law. That's the basis for our law and government. And so our founders said our rights come from God: life, liberty, property, the right to bear arms, the right to free expression. All of that all of those are inalienable rights. And that we as human beings surrender the right to self-government to establish a government whose primary duty is to wield the sword and defend the rights that God gave us. And if we understood that and understood how the laws then are formed, and that Blackstone's commentary said no law can be formed that contradicts the law of nature or the law of God, which is Holy Scripture. And I think all of us and all of your listeners can think of examples where we have created laws at the municipal, state, and federal level that directly contradict the will of God as it's found in nature and Holy Scripture. And the founders said the people have not only a right but a duty not to obey laws that contradict the law of nature and nature's God. And if we would return to that, the Republic would be reestablished, and we would not have to worry about a lot of these things. And we would impeach probably half of our judges
right.
For a number of reasons, because they're not operating under that bedrock principle.
Well, we're speaking with John Guandola, former FBI agent, also former Marine, but also just a great patriot who is telling people the truth about Islamic ideology, the Muslim Brotherhood, speaking spiritually, as you've heard from his heart. John has a huge heart. John has, and I've had the pleasure of working with John in a group called, and I want to do a shout out to Operation Restored Warrior because of the work that they are doing, that John serves on and serves as a counselor to them. They take special operators who are some of the most highly deployed, most time away from their family members, who have been on the front lines of defending our freedoms and trying to save the lives of so many people in foreign countries. And these men come back broken many times, and they are on their last straw. And the work that OperationRestoredWarrior.com they've done to save the lives, the last count when I was there was well over 500, but I'm sure that number is probably approaching 1,000 now, of the number of lives that they have saved, because when there are 22 veterans a day who are committing suicide, many of them are these special operators who have been deployed and stretched to such a thin thread. And the work that John and all of the guys there, Paul Lavelle, the founder, and many others who are on the staff there. So I just want to say to our listeners, this is the kind of man that you're listening to, someone who is still serving in so many different ways despite all the abuse. And as he said, as Christians, we're going to take that abuse. And certainly I've not suffered anything like what John has said, but you can rest assured that if you're willing to tell the truth in this battle, of spiritual battle, you're going to get spoken ill of, no doubt about it. John, we're coming up in the last 3 or 4 minutes here. I want to give our listeners an opportunity to circle back to one question. We've mentioned it briefly, but the counter-violent extremism doctrine and that lexicon, that has not been changed within the FBI that you're aware of. I know I listened to an FBI briefing the other day, and they were using that terminology, and there's no effort to change that. Is that your understanding also?
The only one I know who's trying to change it is the president himself, and he's meeting strict resistance from people inside the government. I think at his heart level, the president gets this, but you're correct. That countering violent extremism nonsense, and it's very dangerous. It's a hostile enemy campaign, is still inside our government. It's a ticking time bomb.
Right.
John, I'm just sitting here in awe. I don't say that very often. But your last part that you shared there, your testimony, I think is amazing. It's amazing for the listeners to be able to hear it. So many times, some of us have gone through, some of the same paths that you've gone down. But when it gets so hard that we turn so bitter, that if we do turn to God, He will bring us back around. He'll help us. And He helped you. He helped me. I was about to give up on God a long time ago. And, it sounds to me like you were there. I know many Christians listening to this radio program have been there. But through prayer, if we talk to Him, God, and our Savior, Jesus Christ, His only begotten Son, they will keep us safe and saved. They will hold us tight.
We're not going to have enough time to cover everything, but John, we just want to say thank you again for coming out today. We're going to have your vice president of your organization, Chris Galbutz, who we've had on the air before.
Neat young man. We had lunch with him.
We did, and we had him on the air. We're going to have him in July and have him come on and speak. He does some great work for you, doesn't he, John?
He does. He's an amazing young man, and his experiences going undercover with Hamas in the U.S. were not only courageous, they have really given us a foundation of truth and evidence to really identify and highlight the threat.
And maybe by the time he comes on, we'll have a resolution on the court case, and I think there probably could be a lot of volumes of Muslim Mafia Part 2, 3, 4, and 5 that would, and I know you guys would love this. Well, John, thank you again for coming on today. It's been an honor to have you again, my dear friend, and God bless you and all the work that you and Chris are doing there.
John, I'm inviting you back anytime you'd like to come back. I'd like to give you a full 2 hours.
Well, thank you.
And,
thank you. I appreciate that.
Well,
and I appreciate you having me on. I want to highlight something you said. I do want to encourage people to go to the website, obviously sign up for the newsletter. We're on Twitter at UTT_USA. We have a YouTube channel and a Facebook page, Understanding the Threat. But one thing, we have a resources page on our website, and the last tab is called What Can I Do? And we just updated it, and we're getting ready to publish a short book that Chris and I are working on, all about very specifically what people can do in their family, in their community, with their law enforcement, with their elected officials, with their pastors, with the national leadership. What can you do? And the
37 seconds, John.
On the website now.
31 seconds.
That's it. I just want to say thank you for having me, and we just encourage people to go there and educate themselves on it.
Praise God. God bless you and all that you're doing, John. I can't thank you enough as an American and a Christian. I cannot thank you from my heart enough. Folks, this is the God Family Country Show you've been listening to with John Guandola, an amazing, amazing warrior for America. Roy White, another amazing warrior for America, right here on the God Family Country Show. Tune in. Don't go away. Hey, listen, I got kind of brain scrambled here. Don't go away. We're going to be back for another hour with Larry Brown. Yeah. I mean, this program has been so deep that I've read the book, Raising a Jihadi Generation, and reading all the other stuff I'm reading, and then to get a man like John on is just absolutely amazing. God bless you. Good night.